Hey everybody, welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. Today's topic is a listener request, the Aces. Sorry about the lack of episode last week, I had a lot going on, so hopefully this one makes up for it. The Aces are part of the Minor Arcana. There are 4 of them, one for each suit. So, you've got the Ace of Cups, the Ace of Pentacles, the Ace of Wands, and the Ace of Swords. This is one of the ways that the Minor Arcana mirrors a playing card deck. The Ace is the first card of each suit. It kicks it off. It's essentially number 1 of the suit. And you'll actually find some decks that don't call them Aces, but instead call them 1. So you might have 1 of Swords or 1 of Wands. It's the same exact thing, Ace, 1. Don't get too caught up on the differences in terminology. One thing that people ask me frequently about the Aces is what's the deal with the big giant hands? If you're familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, you know that they're referring to the aces in this deck because in all 4 aces, you're being handed whatever the suit is, so be it a wand, a cup, a pentacle, or a sword, by a big, gray, disembodied hand. What's the deal with that? We're going to get into that in this episode. We're also going to talk a bit about how do you interpret an ace when it shows up in a reading, and what do these aces mean literally, as in which one of these aces tends to symbolize a new relationship versus which one tends to symbolize a job. Spoiler alert, it's a little more complex than that. As the first card in each suit, a lot of readers interpret the aces as the purest form of their suits. So, for example, the Ace of Swords is the purest form of sword energy being mental acuity and understanding and logic and communication. So while later on swords might kind of start pulling in other elements, like how on our 2 of Swords there's quite a bit of water, and our 6 of Swords there's quite a bit of water, the Ace is just straight up just the mental process, just the objectivity. Similarly, the Ace of Cups can be interpreted as pure emotion, just pure feels, pure vibes. And now you might be saying to me, but on these Ace cards, at least on the Rider-Waite-Smith ones, we do see references to the other suits. For example, I'm looking at my Ace of Swords right now. There's vegetation hanging off that sword. Typically vegetation, and by that I mean fruits, trees, grass, anything that's earthy and gardeny and green, typically symbolizes the element of earth, so Pentacles energy. So what's up with that? Why are there plants on the Ace of Swords, and why is there water and a castle on the Ace of Wands? And we also see some vegetation on the Ace of Cups. Over on the Ace of Pentacles, I don't see any other references to other elements, so why is that if these are supposed to be just the purest expressions of their elements? My interpretation is that these are references to what else is involved in dealing with that pure expression of this element. So, picking on the Ace of Swords again, for example, you can probably tell which of these cards is on the top of the pile on my desk. We have that vegetation, and we have a bunch of mountains down at the bottom, which I know we've talked a bit about previously, how on a tarot card, a mountain symbolizes difficulties to be overcome and things to achieve. So let's break this card down. It's swords, so we know it's all about thoughts, logic, ideas, all of those mental things. And we know it's the ace, so we know we're dealing with something that's brand new and very pure. There's a lot of logic here, and there's a lot of understanding. But think about what happens when you latch onto an idea or have an epiphany. Sure, some thoughts are fleeting, but if you follow that idea to its logical extension and you keep thinking about it, you'll be building something. You're growing that idea and you're pursuing, well, where else can I take this? How can I build on this? It's cumulative and exponential. One piece of information leads you to more and more. So that's how I interpret these plants on here, this idea of now that I have this bit of knowledge or I've had that bit of communication, now I have something tangible to hold on to. Even if it's not literally tangible, like a rock or something that you can touch, it's at least something concrete that I can anchor myself around and use to go further with. And those mountains on the bottom to me symbolize that act of going further, that idea of, well, now that I know this thing, it's impossible to stop knowing it. I can't delete a piece of information from my mind. So, what am I going to do with it? I can either ignore it or I can continue to entertain that idea and see where it takes me. I think the lily pads on the Ace of Cups operate fairly similarly. Once again, we have a card that isn't the earth suit, it's water, so it's emotions, but we see that these emotions anchor you somewhere, that there's some sort of growth and progress and potential. I think maybe potential is a really good word to keep in mind when you're interpreting aces because they're at the beginning of something. A lot like the Fool or the Magician, we're dealing with the fundamentals and the beginnings of things, and these small things could one day become very big things and very impactful things. Right now, you're just getting that first little taste and that first spark, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room to grow. In fact, there's a ton of room to grow, and that's why we see some lily pads growing here. These emotions can grow and lead you places and really root you down in the water, because I think that's why she chose lily pads rather than some other sort of plant. These are plants that root all the way down into the ground of lakes and rivers. No, I don't think there are lily pads in rivers. They need pretty still water, but nonetheless, through that submerged, watery, emotionally charged environment, they find their footing and they root down and they grow and thrive. Just to round it out, let's talk a bit about the vegetation on the Wands and the Pentacles, because there's vegetation there too. Over on the Wands, we see a hill with a castle on it, which we're going to revisit, but we see a couple of trees in the foreground, and I think most importantly, leaves sprouting out of the wand, which we see that motif elsewhere in this deck. We see a bunch of wands that have leaves on them, and also the structure that the Hanged Man is hanging from. Those wands, it's built out of wands, and those wands have some leaves on them. I think we've talked about this previously, about how when you see leaves coming out of a wand, they similarly symbolize growth and progress, and how all the things that you're doing aren't for nothing. They're getting you places and giving you some of that stability. And I think this river winding through the foreground of our Ace of Wands shows that, of course, there's emotions involved. This is a new opportunity. It's exciting. Remember, the wands are all about fire and drive and the things that you do. And with a brand new action opportunity on your plate, of course you're going to feel some sort of way about it. If it didn't speak to you emotionally, you wouldn't even see it as an action opportunity. You just see it as another task. So that makes a whole ton of sense to me. And then let's take a look over at the Pentacles, because, well, of course you'd expect to see lots of plants and vegetation on the Ace of Pentacles. That's where this kind of energy is at home. And look at that garden. There are so many pretty flowers and pretty fruits on the Ace of Pentacles, and what looks like a gate that's surrounded by hedges leading out toward a mountain. I interpret that as this is an opportunity to ground yourself and root yourself, but you're going to have to do difficult things. You'll have to exit your comfort zone if you want to taste the success that the Pentacles bring. You're going to have to leave this lovely walled garden, and it is beautiful, but what's out there beyond the Ace of Pentacles? Eventually, if you want to become the Nine of Pentacles, that lady with the little capped falcon in her awesome garden, or the people on the Ten of Pentacles where they've got dogs and a castle, you're going to have to get outside that comfort zone, and you're going to have to do the hard things. And if you choose not to, that's fine, but just know that you're going to be rooted and grounded in somewhere that doesn't have any room for growth. So why are each of the aces being presented by a big disembodied hand? Whose hands are these? And is there any significance to whether they're coming out of the right side of the card versus the left side? Well, there isn't a definitive answer to why these aces are being presented by big hands, but we can find roots of this imagery in the Marseille style deck. I feel like I've been talking a lot about Marseille style decks lately on this podcast, so if that's inspired anybody to go pick one up, hey, good for you, that's awesome. And if you're ever interested in hearing an episode more about them, let me know. In a lot of Marseille style decks, the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Wands are both presented by a large hand. The Ace of Pentacles, also known as the Ace of Coins, and the Ace of Cups aren't. Very broadly, a lot of readers interpret these hands as the hands of the divine. So this creates the sense that it's a higher power who's presenting you with a new insight or a new emotion or a new opportunity to pursue your passion or even a new way to ground yourself. So why did older decks only portray the wands and the swords this way? Put a pin in that because we're going to circle back to that. But first, I want to explore this idea of the hands being the hands of the divine, because we've played with that idea quite a bit in this deck, this sense of you're being watched, you're being guided and followed by a higher power, however you want to define that higher power. Namely, we see this on the lovers, where we have the angel up above looking down at the two people and providing them with guidance as they build their relationship and communicate with each other. We also see it on Judgment, where we have that angel up above calling the people out of their graves. I've also heard, and I think this is a really interesting take on it, I've heard the white dog on the Fool referred to as symbolic of the divine because the dog follows him through his journey, and it's loyal, and it cares, and it wants to see him succeed, and I just really like this positioning of a higher power as it's with you as you move through your life, rather than thinking about that spiritual guide as some sort of authoritarian figure or even a mentor or a teacher who you have to listen to and be assessed by. Positioning it as a cute little white dog is just like, nope, I'm your little buddy. I'm here with you. Here we are. Here we go. But on the aces, these hands are not little buddies. I'm definitely reading them as more of that mentor figure and that parental authority type figure. Is there room for both depictions of your spiritual guides in the deck? I think so. But typically, these large hands on the aces are understood to be that these instances that are being presented to you are being presented to you seemingly out of nowhere. Possibly you could say they're coming from the universe or coming from some higher power. However you choose to personally interpret that, it's basically the sense that these aren't being handed to you by just another person, that there's something bigger at play here. And I think that comes back to the sense that these are the foundations from which you grow and cultivate and explore. And I'd like to draw your attention to another minor arcana card that has this type of symbolism on it. Take a look at the Four of Cups. We once again have a disembodied cloud hand trying to give something to somebody. But that guy doesn't really look like he wants it, does he? Or is he pensive? Is he considering this cup, but not quite sure if he wants to take it? I think it's a bit more of the latter. I think on this card, the figure is carefully considering whether taking on something else that's emotionally charged is worth his time and worth his sanity, because take a look at this. He's sitting on the grass at the base of a tall tree, so we can read into that he's very rooted. He's in a comfortable place. He's grounded. He's secure. But now, all of a sudden, here comes an opportunity for some emotional labor coming out of nowhere. Does he want to disrupt that peace by saying yes to it? By the time we're at the 4, he's already had a couple experiences under his belt. In fact, let's play with that idea of peace and cups, and specifically cups that are handed to you by disembodied cloud hands, because looking over at our Ace of Cups, it looks quite a bit like the chalice, doesn't it? We've got a dove that appears to be dropping in a Eucharist. This is very Christian imagery, and doves in Christianity and elsewhere symbolize peace. So maybe you could read the Ace of Cups as offering you some peace. It's a new epiphany and it's new emotions, and that's wonderful. And they come with this promise of a bit of peace of mind. I think that's a very relevant way to read this, because, hey, now that I feel this way and I'm using my words to describe how I can feel more secure and more rooted in knowing, yes, this is how I feel. Rooted like those lily pads. But then we have our 2 and then our 3. And now that we've reached the 4, remember, the 4 is essentially a pause. It's you're in your safe zone. Everything has clicked at this point. Things are making sense, and you're not quite ready to go outside that comfort zone. If we're following that storyline with our cups, I'm reading that 4 of Cups is I've gotten myself to a good, grounded, emotionally secure place. Am I ready to exit that and potentially lose a bit of that peace of mind? And if you want to look ahead to the 5 of Cups, does that guy have much peace of mind right now? So, just some food for thought. Perhaps by the time we're at the 4, he's a bit more critical of what he's offered because he's been through the ringer, at least a little bit. He's still only a 4, there's still a ways to go, but as people and characters move through the minor arcana, they gain knowledge, they gain wisdom. That can sometimes make them jaded, that over here the ace is so pure and so unfettered, but by the time we're a couple steps in, we know things and we approach them with a bit more of a critical eye. This is true of the major arcana as well. Think about the differences between those upper cards like the Star and the Moon versus those lower cards like the Hierophant and the Lovers. At those higher levels, you have a lot more understanding of yourself. You've got more self-mastery, and so the actions in those cards are a lot more self-directed versus earlier on, you're getting more support from other people in your life, be it with the Hierophant, you've got teachers and mentors, and then with the Lovers, you've got your peers and your partner. And yes, I realize I just pronounced Hierophant 2 different ways. I've heard both. I don't know if one is technically correct or not. I usually say Hierophant, but sometimes it comes out Hierophant. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about it. So, why did older decks portray the Ace of Wands and the Ace of Swords as being delivered by hands, but not the Ace of Coins or the Ace of Cups? So this is a little more tricky to unravel, largely because Marseille-style deck doesn't refer to just one deck. It's a broad category that a lot of different decks fit into. However, these decks are grouped because they have a lot of visual similarities. So while it's typical to find a Marseille-style deck that depicts the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Wands as both being held by hands, you might also see decks that have one of them is being held by a hand that's facing palm forward toward the viewer, and the other has the hand facing palm away, so you're looking at the back of the hand. And you can read into that by reading, all right, is this pointing toward me or away from me? But also you can extrapolate whether it's in the left or right hand, which can be important. We've talked a bit about how your typically left hand is the receiving hand and right hand is the giving hand. And you can read this into how these hands are positioned on a Marseille-style deck, as well as the hands on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which we're going to talk a tad bit more about how they line up with the elements. I know we started talking about that, but anyway, stick with me regarding the Marseille-style decks right now. So while we don't have a clear answer, there are some interesting theories about this. One is that because the swords and the wands are typically considered masculine elements, you might also interpret that as yang in the sense of yin versus yang. You can apply this framework of masculine versus feminine to the elements, with the elements of air and fire being your masculine or yang, and the elements of water and earth as feminine or yin. I don't often use that type of vocabulary, but just know that that's out there and know that it's relevant here, that this idea of the two more projective, yang, active, however you want to describe it, elements are being handed to you by a hand that has to actively give these to you. They're not just hanging out somewhere, they need to be given or impressed upon you in some way. In contrast, your yin elements, so your pentacles and your cups, are receptive. So they're here, and when you're in these, you're receiving. You're embracing stillness. It's not an action to feel something, it's you sit with your feelings and you understand them. So you could see this as the difference between actively doing things versus passively sitting with them. And if you work with that framework, I think it's interesting to consider the differences between how that's depicted on a Marseille style deck versus how it was changed for the Rider Waite Smith deck, because now we have a hand on all of them. Could that reflect different societal attitudes toward these activities and these parts of your life from the Renaissance era when these Marseille style decks were largely illustrated to the beginning of the 20th century when Arthur Waite had Pamela Coleman Smith illustrate a new tarot deck? One thing that I do think is an interesting carryover from a Marseille style deck to the Rider Waite Smith deck is that while the swords and wands are showing the hand as gripping the item, almost like kind of using it as a weapon, the cups and pentacles have an open palm, almost like they're receiving these items. Or perhaps, if not receiving them, presenting them. It's up to you how you want to interpret that, but just take a look at the difference in how these hands are holding their respective elements. And that actually brings us to the significance of the hand's positioning on the Rider Waite Smith deck, because Arthur Waite was very deliberate about how he wanted the aces laid out. If you didn't listen to the episode from 2 weeks ago about how Pamela Coleman Smith changed the tarot deck, I recommend you do, because in it I get into the changes that the two of them made as they collaborated on the new deck and what that meant in terms of changing some of the symbolism. Because if you look at a Marseille style deck, you'll notice some of the cards are significantly different from their modern counterparts. Namely, Arthur Edward Waite wanted to incorporate a lot of his beliefs and ideas from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn into the tarot deck. And it was an eclectic belief system. Unlike older decks that were pretty consistent in where they were pulling their symbolism from, you'll notice your Rider Waite Smith deck has references to ancient Egypt, and references to Christianity, and references to Judaism, and references that you might be like, this has totally got to mean something, but I'm not a walking Wikipedia. I don't know how to place every single thing in this deck. Sometimes I kind of feel like the Rider Waite Smith deck requires you to just have a very deep pool of knowledge before you even dive in. That, yeah, sure, you can open up a deck and you can start interpreting cards fairly quickly by just describing what's happening in the pictures, but that's surface level. Then you want to dive deeper. I'm thinking about that iceberg meme here, and that requires you to have a bunch of background knowledges and a bunch of references memorized. And I hate to use the word memorized with tarot because it feels so antithetical to what you're actually doing, but you kind of do need to know, all right, what is the symbolic significance of this color, this positioning, this animal, etc. Almost like watching the Gilmore Girls and having to know what all the references are to understand what the heck they're talking about. Like, sure, you could watch this nice show about a mom and daughter who live in a cute town, but they keep dropping all these pop culture references that, unless you're some kind of pop culture encyclopedia, you're like, wait, what? I gotta go look that up. But then you do go look it up, and then you understand it, and then the dialogue hits harder because it's like, oh, that communicates so much more than just those couple of words. So, in adapting the tarot deck to reflect the beliefs of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, he played with the different elements and where they're positioned on a pentagram in how they're positioned on the aces. So, if you want, if you're not driving or doing something as you're listening to this, grab a pen and paper and draw a pentagram, just a basic 5-pointed star. All right, you got it? Okay, so each of these 5 points corresponds with an element. The upper left is correlated with the element of air. The upper right is correlated with the element of water. The lower right is correlated with the element of fire. And the lower left is correlated with the element of earth. The top point is correlated with the element of spirit, which is typically understood to be the combination of the other 4 elements. So when you have all of these together, that's how you get your spiritual side and your connection with the divine. Now, think back to the episode about the devil, because we've actually talked about this on the podcast before. Remember how he has the inverted pentagram up in between his horns, and that's symbolic of having your priorities not in the right place, with spirit pointing downward and fire and earth pointing upward, as if you're prioritizing your passions and your security and your attachment to material things over your spiritual health and life. Arthur Edward Waite was very deliberate about how he wanted these four aces to look visually in terms of their correlation with where they fit onto a pentagram. So if you lay out your four aces, you can see it. Our cup looks like it's coming from more so the upper right hand side, while our wand is kind of positioned a bit lower, almost like it's coming up from that lower right. Over on the other side, it does, to me at least, kind of look like the sword's hand is reaching down from its higher position, being up in the upper left, to provide this sword, while the pentacle is just kind of hanging out down there, offering up this coin. So, how do you interpret an ace in a reading? It's something new, it's something fresh, it's something where you're just starting out at the ground level. But how do we get more specific than that? Well, we can look to the suit. We know if it's an ace of cups, it's a new emotion. If it's an ace of wands, we know it's a new opportunity to do things. But let's get even more specific than that. What would be an ace of cups moment? Well, what would give you a new emotion? A lot of people say new relationships or maybe marriage, and that's 100% right. Marriage is absolutely an ace of cups situation, as is starting to date someone. But wait, what if you're asking about your fiance and the topic of marriage comes up and you get the Ace of Pentacles? Does that mean they're only marrying you for your money? No, not necessarily. It could symbolize the starting of a new life together and laying that foundation for the two of you as spouses. So wait, so then is the Ace of Cups or is the Ace of Pentacles the one that symbolizes marriage? The answer is either and both. And the reason for this is because both are true. Getting married is a highly emotional situation, and it's also the start of building the foundations of the rest of your lives together. It is the joining of your assets, and it is you two coming together emotionally and recognizing your relationship in this official capacity. So whether marriage comes up for you as an Ace of Cups or an Ace of Pentacles largely depends on the context of your question and also your perspective on the situation. Maybe in your tarot card reading, you don't doubt for a second that you guys love each other and that this is a beautiful emotional thing, but you're a bit concerned with the financial aspect of it. You're going to find it as more of a Pentacles thing. Similarly, a lot of people read the Pentacles as starting a new job, which makes a lot of sense. Of course, an Ace of Pentacles could be a new job because that's starting fresh in something that's ideally going to have a paycheck, benefits, all of those things that build stability. But could a new job show up as a different ace? Yes. Maybe the focal point for you is the mental challenge that it's going to bring, and that this job is an opportunity for you to use your brain in a new way. You might get it as an Ace of Swords. A new job could also show up as the Ace of Wands. After all, you're going to be challenged and you're going to have to do things and take action. So, my point here is that each of the four aces can't be directly connected to very specific situations in your life because they more so reflect how you feel about a situation and how you're understanding that situation. A more helpful way to interpret an ace in a pull is to read it as where you stand in relation to the other cards you've pulled. For example, an Ace of Swords paired with a Four of Wands could mean fresh insights about how far you've come toward your goals. An Ace of Cups sandwiched between the Hermit and the Ten of Swords could symbolize your new feelings about the challenging mental load on your shoulders that you're now only able to recognize and verbalize because you spent some time alone analyzing the situation. In this second example, you could easily swap in the Ace of Swords and it still makes sense. But see how the story changes a little bit? In both cases, we kick it off with the Hermit, so we are self-isolating and we're analyzing and we're breaking down the situation we're facing detail by detail to really find some truth and pull out some kind of understanding of it. then we have the ace. And then on the other side of it, we've got that 10 of swords. So that sense of, I am overwhelmed by all this knowledge and all this information and everything I have to think about. With the ace of cups in the middle, you've got some new emotions about that mental load. With the ace of swords in the middle, you've got a new understanding of that mental load. Both can be true. And in fact, I think it makes a lot of sense for both to be true because new insights inherently provoke emotions, and emotions provoke insights. But which message is more important for you to hear out of this tarot card reading? That's the message you're going to get. So if you need to be more tuned into the emotional side of it, then the cards are going to throw you an Ace of Cups. Or if you need to know you're not crazy, yes, you are seeing things clearly, yes, you do understand, they'll throw you the Ace of Swords. In either scenario, because it's an ace, you know there's more to come. But you've at least gotten started. You've taken that challenging first step, not unlike the Fool, to keep going and keep furthering your understanding. So that's about all I've got for you today. I hope you learned something, and in the interest of talking a bit more about Marseille decks, the more I think about it, the more I think we are going to do something about them because, hey, they get mentioned a lot, and it'd be good to give you some context. So stay tuned for that. As always, thank you for listening, and if you like what you heard, subscribe and leave me a good review. It really does help. And if you're interested in a tarot card reading with me, hit me up. You probably know where to find me by now, and if you don't, you can shoot me an email at omg@omgtarot.com, or you can DM me on Instagram where my handle is its_omg_tarot. Alrighty, talk to you next week. Bye-bye.